welcome, very instructive introductory remarks. For those of you who don't know, the Department of Social Development, for us who have been working in this area for a number of years, if we think back of the pre-94 and the post-1994 period, there's no comparison actually. The work that has been done, especially since 94, to extend the social protection and particularly the social assistance system across a wide spectrum of people in this country. I mean, you heard the figure 18 million, so roughly 1/3 of the African population in some form or other, are recipients of the state support in this area. But also innovatively, the range of benefits targeted and tailored to the needs of people in this country. It's just been astonishing for all of us who work in this area. We've noticed that the department is central currently to the reform of the Social Security process. It was also so the case in 2000 to 2002 when, with the help of the department, a committee of inquiry into a comprehensive system of Social Security was set up. The recommendations largely adopted by Cabinet and implemented, and this department plays a central role in that. We look forward to the next processes or unfolding of this reform process. May I also say that while we are talking about the department, in the next 2 days, you will hear quite a bit about what is happening in the region, also what is happening in Africa. More broadly, there are a few colleagues actually from other countries, such as Uganda, participating in the conference. You will have views from SADC as a region. By some of our researchers, you will have views from the African continental perspective. Some of these actually provided by our UN agencies, the UNDP and the WFP, were part and parcel of this conference. And I think it needs to be said that despite extremely difficult contexts and circumstances, especially in COVID-19, with economies and health systems, public health systems of countries in this continent being hit particularly hard, that nevertheless, what Africa and the countries of this continent and also the regional continental structures, with the assistance of UN agencies and HONOR and other specialist organizations such also as the FES, what countries have been doing in response, my view is just remarkable, despite the extremely difficult circumstances. This country is certainly no exception. If I could just highlight one of the instruments indicated by Mr. Mchunu, i.e. the COVID-19 related social relief and distress grant, is really being quoted all over the world as a model response, especially from or by developing countries to the specificities of the COVID-19 response. The extent of that grant, the fact that it has been introduced specifically and specially, and also the scope, as we have heard, who are all the people who increasingly are benefiting from the grant. And so it should be. We have to adapt and take appropriate steps given the changing context, and the pandemic is one such context. Before we start with the next session, just a few other remarks. Not all of us will be present this evening when we have at the occasion of the dinner, also a bit of feedback on what has happened and where we are and where we are going. And tomorrow, the strategic plan will also be presented. But let me just say, for the sake of those who may not be all that well informed, SASPEN has been in existence for many, many years. We are extremely grateful for the support that we have thus far received from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation to make it possible for us to do the work. This is a network, if I could use the word, of people who work, specialize, are interested in, and perhaps most importantly, are truly committed to the cause of social protection in Southern Africa and in the continent. The colleagues who participate in SASPEN, so-called experts, if you like, but we don't even need to use that term, are people who come from government, come from academia, come from practice, civil society, and what I've just told you is well reflected in the makeup of the governing structures. We've got 3 governing structures. The one is a board of directors, being responsible for the operationally running the organization. Then there's a board of guarantors, the trustees, as I've said. And then thirdly, we also have a broader-based advisory panel that would include other colleagues from all over the SADC region as well. We are privileged and fortunate to have a number of experts around us, people who really specialize, and as I've said, truly committed. It was such a pleasure yesterday when we had the advisory panel meeting just to see the sheer level and measure of commitment, and also to take the organization forward. We work on social protection. We try to see where we are in the region, what are the issues, what do we need to do to support reform, and you'll hear the next 2 days so much reflection on where we are and what are the reform needs and what can be done. SASPEN has a range of activities. The feedback will be given, and that will also be available on the SASPEN website, at least after this conference. But we specialize in having this annual conference. We have country workshops where we go to countries, talk to them, engage with them, social protection, see what we can learn from them, but also to what extent we can offer, services from amongst our own fraternity, so to say. We are engaged also in research. We're in the final stages of a very important research project that we'll hear more about later today, I believe, granted a research grant by OSISA. And we have done research in other areas too, especially in the last year in the COVID-19 context. SASPEN has been intimately involved in a large range of international symposia, workshops, where our people, our fraternity, so to say, have taken part in this. Just a few words about the program. We're going to hand over to our chair for this next session within a moment. But this is then the first keynote presentation, and the chairperson of that session will introduce our speaker, whom I already mentioned, Ms. Renata Nowak-Garmer of the UNDP in Addis Ababa. Then we have for the next session after tea, the regional and country findings. This is indeed the SUSISA project that we talked about, and the session will be led by Dr. Gift Dafaleya, one of the the leaders of this particular project. So Dafaleya sits there in the corner at the back. Then we have a session later in the day, later in the morning rather, chaired by Mr. Kinanda Chibukwa from Namibia, sitting over there, still on the regional and country findings. Later on, we have poster sessions from 12:30. Very, very interesting posters that we have received. In the afternoon, we continue with unconditional cash transfers and access to social services. Session chair, Ms. Mutale Wakunuma, and I believe Mutale has already joined us. Mutale, where are you? I think there's Mutale. A very, very interesting session. You can just look at the topics to be covered there and the speakers who will speak to us. She will continue with a later session in the afternoon as well on access, universal access to health coverage. She will be chairing that session. And then in the late afternoon, until 5 o'clock at least, we will have Mr. Sergio Falanga from Mozambique. By the way, Ms. Okunuma is from Zambia. I'm not sure whether Mr. Salanga's joined us, whether he's virtually available, but he will chair that session for us. Tomorrow morning, we start again with another keynote presentation, and that session chair is Professor Evans Kalula, who is joining us virtually for this conference. He's from Cape Town. Then we have a session on inclusion and access to social services by women and other marginalized groups. Later in the morning, tomorrow, the session chair there is Ms. Nicola Yon from Zimbabwe. Ms. Yon, are you here with us already? There you see Ms. Yon there at the back. Late morning tomorrow Inclusion Access to Social Services, again by women and other marginalized groups, session to be chaired by Dr. Dafalaya, which is actually a panel discussion. In the early afternoon tomorrow, a special session on legal, financial, institutional frameworks for social protection, social services. Session chair, Mr. Taku Fundira from Zimbabwe. Mr. Fundira, where are you? There you see Mr. Fundira as well. And then for the launch of the strategic plan, very important event, tomorrow afternoon, session chair, Mr. Vince Chipatuka. Where are you, Vince? Vince is now an FAS, working for the FAS in Zambia, and he is, as you would then reckon, also a Zambian himself. And then we have the concluding panel session tomorrow, which I will chair with really just an array of people who will participate in that. We are very fortunate to have people from the World Food Program and a few others as well. And then the end of the conference, the closing session. Ladies and gentlemen, much to look forward to. It's a packed program. Stay well, stay informed, enjoy the conference, participate in the manner that we've indicated, and please use the time also to network, just to try and meet each other, talk to each other, find out what we are doing, how we can support each other, and then on the more social side as well. There's lots to enjoy, to eat and drink. And for those of you who stay at the 54 on Bath, I'm informed that you actually have a direct access door that takes you directly into the mall. But that's only after the conference, not while we're having a conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a wonderful conference. Could I ask our Susan Onaka is Professor Kanyangolo from Malawi. Is she online to chair the next session? I know she has had some connection problems. Nagai, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Marius.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. I'm going to hand over to Professor Nagai Kanyangolo from the University of Malawi. Nagai will chair the next important keynote speaker session for us again. Thank you so much to our panelists this morning. Nagai, all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olivier. Welcome from those of us who are online. We welcome you, those that are attending physically, to the 8th International Annual SASPEN Conference, the Conference on Social Protection and Social Services in the SADC, Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of the conference. And in this session, we are going to have our keynote presentation. The keynote presentation will be delivered, who is the UNDP Africa Social Protection and Inclusion Growth Specialist. In this role, she provides technical advisory to countries and regional institutions and develops regional and global policy and tools. She led the State of Social Assistance in Africa, a publication and data project, and is currently leading a project aimed at strengthening community-based social protection mechanisms in 5 African countries. In her previous position, Renata focused on youth employment and social inclusion. Before joining UNDP, Renata worked at a foundation that fights xenophobia and promotes intercultural dialogue. Renata holds an MA degree in German philology from the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, and a master's degree in economic and political development from Columbia University, New York, where she was a Hermann Fellow. She also earned the Hermann Certificate in Post-Soviet Studies from Columbia University. She is currently pursuing a doctorate in social policy and research at the University of Bath in the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Renata Nowak-Garmer for the keynote presentation. Welcome.
I hope you can see me and hear me. Hello, everyone. Good morning, Johannesburg, and best greetings from Addis Ababa. I really wished I could be there with you, especially as Marius has advertised that a mall is right next to the hotel where you're staying. But jokes aside, these are the COVID times, and part of our new ways of working is having conferences and meetings online. So I really am grateful for the opportunity of being here with you, and also feel very honored and privileged to address this forum, and for the third time. So I truly feel at home at SASPEN. And thank you so much, Chair, for introducing my talk today. So without a doubt, we will look back at the current times as the COVID era. People like me and you, we are used to working online, but for those whose work cannot be taken online, such as the street vendors, traders, domestic workers, and other workers in the informal economy, COVID has meant more restriction, less work, and thus less income, interrupted schooling with digital divide that is preventing the children from poorer households to take classes online. It also means, and this is a very sad statistics, more gender-based violence at home. It also means worries about health fees and also an extremely slow rollout of vaccinations that really leaves African countries vulnerable to the spread of the new variants, and also to the continued restrictions that have had a truly devastating impacts on local economies and communities. But the pandemic has done one big favor, and I'm saying it in quotation mark, to those who care about scaling up social protection systems across the global south. Namely, it has drawn the attention of the policymakers, international and global community, development partners, and the public at large to the necessity of a sustainable and comprehensive social protection systems to protect workers from external shocks, particularly in case of workers in the informal economy, whose jobs, as I said, are precarious and who have no access to employment-related social insurance or social assistance offered to those in extreme poverty. We call them the missing middle, but in reality, these are around 80 to 90% of all workers. So it's rather a missing majority than a missing middle. As we have heard from the previous speaker, and I really have to congratulate South Africa on a truly remarkable response to COVID. That's not an isolated case, but I think it's one of the best practices. In fact, most of the countries in Africa hurried to introduce temporary social protection measures, such as cash transfers, subsidies, fee waivers, to compensate for the loss of income to the most vulnerable population. As I said, I find the South African experience extremely useful, especially as the government has decided to protect all people, regardless of their status, whether they're migrants, whether they're informal economy workers, and also provided the additional services that we have heard. This is truly a remarkable achievement. So these all are very welcome developments, but a systemic solution in ensuring progress toward the universal access to social protection is an urgent policy matter for the region. Over the past decade, social protection has gained a prominent place as a policy to address poverty and vulnerability, following the widely celebrated and also very well documented experiences of cash transfers in Latin America, conditional cash transfers in Latin America, such as Bolsa Familia in Brazil or Oportunidades in Mexico. The diffusion of social protection policy across the globe has accelerated with the adoption of the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals, but also and significantly through the adoption of social policy framework of the African Union, and most recently of the Protocol on the people's rights to social security. And I apologize if the name is not correct. And of course, in the African Union Agenda 2063. The non-contributory form of social protection or social assistance, typically delivered in the form of cash or food transfers, school feedings, and public works, has also taken deeper roots in Sub-Saharan Africa. There has been a sharp increase in the number of social protection programs over the past decade. We have seen their scaling up from small temporary projects supported by donors to permanent programs that often reach nationwide coverage. Most national constitutions mention social protection, and many refer to it as a right that the state is obliged to uphold. And more laws are being passed to that effect. One, of course, example is South Africa, where there is a very strong legal framework for social protection. Another is Mauritius, yet another Kenya. In the last 10 to 15 years, most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa have adopted a strategy or policy on social protection. So now, out of 46 countries in the region, 31 have adopted such a document. Several countries have established a dedicated line ministry for social protection, coordination bodies, and increased their human and physical capacities to deliver social protection according to the mandates set in the policy frameworks. And finally, as a whole, public expenditure on social protection in Sub-Saharan African countries amounts to around 2.1% of GDP, and the domestic funding for social protection is now exceeds now the ODA. But of course, the gaps remain very, very significant. So while social protection is gaining traction, as I have just explained, several constraints stand in the way of realizing the right to social protection for everyone in the region. First, social protection coverage is still very low. In total, only 13.7% of the total population of Sub-Saharan Africa has access to at least one social protection benefit, according to the newest data by ILO. And for comparison, the global average is around 47%. So this leaves the majority of African informal workers with no access to any form of state-sponsored social protection and prone to vulnerabilities in case of crisis such as COVID-19, but also in case of just regular household level shocks, such as illness, temporary job loss, recurrent floods, or other hazards. In recent years, and at UNDP, we have studied these experiences. Several countries in the region have started to make significant efforts to develop a range of contributory and non-contributory schemes to extend social protection to those in the informal economy. And these include extension of legal and effective coverage, improvements in quality of benefits and services provided, introduction of new schemes, flexible ability to make flexible contributions, leveraging digitalization and other technologies to simplify administrative procedures, and so on. But these are still quite new and limited practices. Second, social assistance in Africa only reaches 7.1%. And I really need to repeat this number. It's only 7.1% of all poor and vulnerable persons in Sub-Saharan Africa. The reality is that over 30%, the latest data, 30% of the population of Sub-Saharan Africa lives in extreme poverty. And we hear from the World Bank and others that because of COVID, this number can significantly increase. You might be surprised, I was actually surprised reading about very high food insecurity in this region, in Southern African region. So just to give you a few numbers, in South Africa, it's around 50%. In Lesotho, 78%. Eswatini, 63%. Namibia, 68%, and Botswana, 70%. These are still very high numbers that need urgent attention. On the whole, in terms of vulnerable groups, the group that has the highest coverage in terms of the non-contributory transfers are older persons, with almost 20% of persons covered. In contrast, only 6.7% of persons with disabilities receive cash transfers. And only, which is really important right now, only around 16% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa have access to health insurance. So given these low coverage figures vis-a-vis the needs, for the majority of people living in Sub-Saharan African countries, it is the non-state actors, such as community-based organizations, family and kinship groups, or faith-based organizations that are the main providers of what I call de facto social protection and related services. These include cash and food loans, but also loans to start a business, or loans for an emergency, savings schemes, microinsurance, foster care for orphans, community childcare, burial services, bereavement services, and so on. And remittances, as you're well aware, constitute a very big boost for income boost for vulnerable households. So virtually every poor, low-income household in Africa belongs or depends on community or informal institutions in case of crisis. That, however, what is not recognized by the state and the government structure, that these mechanisms play a crucial role in filling the protection gap that currently exists. Yes, they are mentioned in several of policy documents, but really there is very little attention in terms of programmatic ways how to build synergies between the non-state and state social protection actors. Finally, and this is one of the major criticisms of the current social protection model applied in Africa, is that it emphasizes social assistance or cash transfers. And because the cash transfers are very small, they're usually used for consumption and not for building assets and capacities that would allow the recipients to graduate and stay out of poverty. There are also very few programs that are large scale and that they promote economic inclusion or social inclusion or access to social services. So this over-reliance on cash transfers might have driven attention and investments away from a more holistic social protection and social development policy model that is needed in Africa. In this regard, I'm truly happy to see this issue back on the agenda in this conference, since the discussion will be around social protection and social and basic services in the SADC region. Social protection cannot stay divorced from other social policies and access to basic services. And this is recognized by the national and regional policy documents and instruments. For example, the African Union Social Policy Framework, which I had mentioned before, or the draft protocol on the rights of citizens to social protection and social security that had been very recently adopted. Access to basic services such as health, education, water, sanitation, energy is an important determinant of well-being and a measure countering multidimensional poverty. And so social protection transfers need to be accompanied by efforts to facilitate access to basic services, social services, and other government services for the vulnerable groups. As we know, the social inclusion and social and economic inclusion potential of social protection is not fully realized. The SDG tracking data for Sub-Saharan Africa tells us that the region is still lagging behind in terms of primary education of children from poor households, with significant differences between rural and urban areas. Only about, as I mentioned also before, 16% of people have access to healthcare. Access to energy, water, sanitation is still far behind the world averages. For example, only 27% of Sub-Saharan African population has access to basic sanitation. Social services and social work can be effective in helping marginalized groups tackle complex vulnerabilities, for example, with job search, accessing basic services, psychosocial services, and so on. But this is still a very new field in Africa that requires further investment. Although we hear, for example, that in South Africa, this part of social protection is quite advanced. In terms of gender equality, social protection can be designed to help close the gender gap in many ways, not only socially and economically, but also with respect to harmful social norms. The current social assistance programs do not incorporate measures that would improve economic outcomes of their participants, though the potential for economic inclusion is significant. Combining social protection with deliberate effort to beef up productive capacities of vulnerable groups through, for example, business support, low interest credit, preferential access to markets, training and skills development can be a powerful tool in addressing poverty and vulnerability and can propel inclusive growth and structural transformation. So what should be done to achieve a more comprehensive social protection policy and practice in Africa? First, social protection systems need to pay more attention to the creation of linkages to other social policies, including access to basic services. Second, there is a pressing need to address the lack of social protection coverage for the working age population. This necessitates prioritizing the extension of social protection to informal economy workers by offering flexible solutions and innovations to introduce a scale-up coverage, including through a mix of contributory and non-contributory schemes, private-public partnerships, private insurance, or universal social protection schemes. This area is still greatly underinvested, not only in government policy, but also in research and lessons in research. And so lessons from countries that have been trying to rectify this coverage gap by instituting schemes for informal economy workers should be studied further and evaluated. National dialogues, particularly in the Southern African region, about delinking social protection from employment relationship, for example, by introducing a universal basic income scheme, also help drive attention to the issue and should be supported. Third, the non-state social protection mechanisms are deeply embedded in African societies and cultures and perform an important social protection function. While, as I said, several national policies acknowledge the role of the informal social protection, there is a need for building an interface between the state and non-state providers of social protection services to mutual benefit. So these are some reflections on how to build perhaps a more comprehensive model of social protection, one that is based not just on social assistance and cash transfers, but also considered the other efforts, including the non-state, to build a more comprehensive, and of course, this access to services to build a more comprehensive social protection. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful event, and I'll make sure to log in as much as I can to follow the sessions. Over to you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you very much, Renata, for that keynote address on a special and interesting topic towards a more holistic social protection model in Sub-Saharan Africa. The keynote has raised quite a number of interesting issues, and key to that, the recommendations that have been made with regard to how we can indeed develop a comprehensive and holistic social protection model specific to Sub-Saharan Africa. We have about 10 minutes for us to have a discussion, and therefore, if we have comments, questions, please feel free. Those that are online, you can raise your hand. Those that are in the conference, please, those in the conference, help us to get people to the mic. The floor is now open for questions or comments. Thank you. Susan, please help those that are physically present. If you could just please go to the mic and make your comment or ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, the keynote speaker, for the wonderful deliberations. I had a question. While looking at the SADC region and the levels of poverty and the essence of social protection in these areas, where the traditional social protection mechanisms which exist in the different communities taken into account, because when we look at the statistics showing 7.1% are the only is the only percentage of households or of the population with social protection, where the traditional social protection mechanism also taken into place. Because when you look at the general statistics, this is never quantified, whereas in reality, majority of the communities, they rely on this. I just needed to know that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that comment and question. Next, please. Yes, I've seen a hand up. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. I'm Isaac Chinyoga from the University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much, Renata, for the model that you presented to us. I think you touched on a lot of things that the region can do in terms of scaling up our social protection. But my question pertains to the informal economy or the informal population that falls in the formal economy in terms of coverage, because you mentioned that one of the key criticisms is that of low coverage. So my question would be, in terms of capacity, what can countries in Sub-Saharan Africa do to upscale these social protection programs covering that population? Because I'm sure you know that the informal economy is growing, both in countries like South Africa and many other Southern African countries, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana. So what should be done to cover, and do these states have the capacity to expand social protection to that population? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You raised quite a number of issues there. I recognize Roderick online. Please proceed. Roderick, you have a hand up. Please proceed to make your comment or ask your question. Please unmute your mic. Roderick Mupedziswa, you have the floor. If not ready, if there's anybody else in the conference, please proceed. Oh, Roderick is complaining that he's been muted. Can you please unmute Roderick Mupedziswa so that he can make his comment? As we are waiting for the ICT to unmute Roderick, may we please have anybody on the floor take to the mic, please. Please proceed, Roderick. Roderick, you're now unmuted. Please proceed. All right, maybe as we are sorting that problem, may I ask Renata to please respond to the two points that have been raised.
Thank you, and thank you for this interesting question. The first question, a very good point, namely what is measured by international standards, by the standards that go into what we capture under SDG 1.3, which is the social protection goal, are the traditional, if you will, traditional in a sense, formal social protection measures such as social insurance, social assistance, and a variety of other instruments. For example, pensions, social pensions, pensions connected to social insurance, and so on. There is the whole list of what is measured under SDG 1.3. So if we take that standard measurement that is being captured in international frameworks, then in fact, social assistance, the non-contributory part of social protection, is only 7.1%. But an excellent point, we also need to account for the role of the traditional or so-called informal social protection mechanisms that actually provide assistance to over 90% of people in need in Africa. And this is why at UNDP, we are really trying to look at these mechanisms, studying them currently in 5 countries to see how can we, to see first of all, how they function, how we could strengthen their ability in their so-called social protection function, but also how to ensure or try to advocate for the policy linkages between the state provided social protection and this traditional social protection mechanism. The second question around the informal economies, in fact, yes, it's something that is it's not, as someone says, a shadow economy or an anomaly in Africa. It's the mainstream economy. So we know that this is the biggest employer in Africa. It's employment. Informal economy is the biggest employer in Africa, and most of the people in the informal economy are self-employed, which is also very important to remember. So about 80 to even 90% of people working in the informal economy. The informal economy contributes to around 50% of GDP of Sub-Saharan African countries. So it really is the time for policymakers to really recognize the contribution of the informal economy to the national output, but also the needs for protection of the informal economy workers. I have mentioned a few experiences. These are from Togo, Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, and other countries that have looked at this issue and have tried to design very much homegrown solutions to this problem. So they're introducing a sliding scale systems where informal workers pay into sort of social insurance for informal economy workers, but those who cannot pay because they are working poor pay less or are exempt. We have different experiences that from countries that connect social protection measures for informal economy workers with traditional social protection. For example, in terms of cooperatives in Togo or in Ghana. We have some countries that look at gender aspects of needs for informal economy workers. So I have shared a link to a publication on these emerging experiences, and I believe that they might be a good food for thought for anyone interested in extending social protection to informal economy workers. These are just emerging practices. There is a lot to learn from, and the success is varied, but it's an important step in that the countries try to address the coverage gap.
Thank you very much, Renata. We should be closing the session now. We still have an outstanding hand from Roderick. If you're ready, please proceed. I think he has dropped. If there's any other last comment from the floor, please proceed. We have none. All right, I think this is for me then to say thank you very much to Renata for the wonderful keynote address, addressing us on an important topic on building a more holistic social protection model for Africa. Thank you all participants, especially those that also engaged with Renata and raised some comments. We now hand over to the conference room, and thank you everybody for this opportunity. Wishing you a good day. Goodbye.
Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our previous panelists. I'm coming here to tell you we are really running a little behind time. So it's now tea time, and in the next session to be led by Dr. Gafaleya. Just take note of the time that we try and make up some of our lost time, please. You probably have seen the tea and refreshment facilities as you came in. It's on your left-hand side as you go out. And colleagues from the Department of Social Development, just stay behind here, please. And then Renata has mentioned that very important UNDP publication in 2021 on social protection in the informal economy. Lately, there has been quite a lot has been written on that, even in the African and developing world context. The ILO also has come up with a number of recent publications. If you want more information, welcome to come and talk to me. I can advise you as to where to look for further information, but it is an important topic. In fact, the Department of Social Development recently embarked on a study to see how a particular framework for covering workers in the informal economy under social insurance in South Africa could be designed. So that study has been completed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's tea time now, and let's try to be back literally in 15 minutes or less. Thank you.
Hello, Victor. Hello.